Linda Hayes stood in line at the busy New York International Airport, her polished boots clicking softly against the tiled floor. The terminal was alive with noise. People chatting, children laughing, announcements blaring over the speakers. Suitcases rolled along the ground and the smell of coffee drifted through the air. Linda adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag on her shoulder and took a deep breath. She had been traveling for work for years, but today felt different. Something about the energy in the room made her uneasy. Captain Linda Hayes wasn't just any traveler. She was a senior officer in the United States Space Command, a position she had earned through hard work, dedication, and countless hours of training. Her uniform was crisp, its dark fabric adorned with medals and insignias that told the story of her service. People often stopped to thank her when they saw her in public, moved by the respect her rank commanded. But today, no one seemed to notice her. They were too caught up in their own lives, rushing to catch flights or greeting loved ones. As she approached the security checkpoint, Linda reminded herself that this was routine. She had done this dozens of times before. All she needed to do was show her ID, go through the scanner, and head to her gate. Simple. The flight would take her to Houston, where she was scheduled to attend an important briefing about a classified space mission. It was a big responsibility, but Linda was used to handling pressure. Still, the knot in her stomach wouldn't go away. When it was her turn, Linda stepped up to the counter and handed her identification card to the security agent. His name tag read, Greg, and he looked young, maybe in his mid-20s. He glanced at her ID, then back at her face, his expression unreadable. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then Greg frowned and turned to another agent, a taller man named Ryan, who was standing nearby. "Can you check this?" Greg asked, holding up Linda's ID. Ryan leaned over, squinting at the card. Linda felt her heart skip a beat. What was going on? She had double-checked her documents before leaving home. Everything was in order, or so she thought. Ryan tapped something into his computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Linda waited patiently, though her patience was starting to wear thin. After what felt like forever, Ryan looked up at her. "Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your credentials," he said. His tone was polite but firm. Linda blinked, surprised. "What kind of issue?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. She didn't want to sound defensive, but she couldn't hide the edge of concern creeping into her words. "We're seeing some discrepancies in your records," Ryan explained. "It's possible there was a mistake when your information was entered into the system." Linda shook her head, trying to stay calm. "That's not possible. I've traveled with these same credentials multiple times. There must be a misunderstanding." Greggy nodded sympathetically, though his eyes remained wary. "We understand, ma'am, but we need to follow protocol. Could you please step aside so we can look into this further?" Linda hesitated. Protocol? This had never happened to her before. Normally, her status as a senior officer meant smooth sailing through security. Yet here she was, being singled, out like a criminal. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, clutching her carry-on bag tightly. As she moved away from the counter, she noticed other travelers glancing at her curiously. Some looked sympathetic, while others appeared judgmental. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable. A few minutes later, a female security agent approached her. Her badge identified her as Officer Karen White. Unlike Greg and Ryan, Karen seemed more approachable, her smile warm and reassuring. "Captain Hayes," she said. "I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll get this sorted out as soon as possible." "Thank you," Linda replied, grateful for the small gesture of kindness. "I really don't understand what's going on. My documents are valid. I'm supposed to be on a flight to Houston for a critical meeting." Karen nodded. "I believe you, ma'am. Unfortunately, until we confirm everything, we can't let you proceed. Please come with me to a private area where we can discuss this further." Private area. The phrase sent a chill down Linda's spine. Private areas usually meant trouble. Still, she followed Karen, reminding herself that arguing wouldn't help. Maybe if she cooperated, They could resolve the issue quickly, and she could still make her flight. They entered a small windowless room with plain white walls and a single metal table. A camera mounted in the corner blinked steadily, its red light casting a faint glow. Linda sat down on the chair provided, setting her bag beside her. Karen took a seat across from her, pulling out a tablet. "Let's start by verifying your identity," Karen said. "Can you tell me your full name, date of birth, and social security number?" Linda recited the information without hesitation. Karen typed it into her tablet, her brow furrowing as she worked. She murmured after a moment. "According to our records, there's a mismatch with your social security number. Are you sure you gave me the correct one?" "Yes," Linda said firmly. "Absolutely sure. I've used the same number my entire life. There's no way it's wrong." Karen sighed, looking genuinely troubled. "I'm sorry, Captain Hayes. Until we can confirm this, I'm afraid we can't allow you to board your flight." The words hit Linda like a punch to the gut. Not allowed to board? How could this be happening? She clenched her fists under the table, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm a senior officer in the Space Command. I have top-secret clearance. You can call my superiors if you need confirmation." Karen held up a hand, trying to calm her down. "No, ma'am. And I promise we're doing everything we can to verify your information. But until then, we have to follow procedure." Procedure. That word again. Linda wanted to scream. Procedure wasn't supposed to treat decorated officers like suspects. Procedure wasn't supposed to ignore common sense. Yet here she was, stuck in a tiny room, unable to move forward. Time dragged on. Linda tried to focus on staying calm, but her mind kept racing. Why was this happening? Was it truly a clerical error, or was something else at play? She thought back to the weeks leading up to her trip. There had been strange messages popping up on her phone, anonymous texts warning her to cancel her plans. At the time, she dismissed them as pranks, nothing more. Now she wasn't so sure. Finally, Karen returned with Greg and Ryan. Their expressions were grim. "Captain Hayes," Greg began, "we've contacted higher authorities and they're looking into the matter. In the meantime, we'll need to hold you here until we receive further instructions." "Hold her here?" Linda stared at them, incredulous. "You can't seriously expect me to stay in this room indefinitely," she said. "I have responsibilities, important responsibilities." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "We understand, ma'am, but until we clear this up, we have no choice." No choice. The phrase echoed in Linda's ears as the door closed behind them, leaving her alone once again. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was humiliating. And deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was also deliberate. The minutes ticked by, painfully slow in the small, sterile room. Linda Hayes sat stiffly on the hard chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. She glanced at the camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking steadily, and wondered if anyone was watching her right now. If they were, why weren't they doing anything to help? The thought made her jaw tighten. Outside the door, she could hear muffled voices, Greg and Ryan discussing something in low tones. Every so often, their words grew louder, just enough for her to catch snippets of their conversation. "Still, no match," Greg muttered at one point. "Her files flagged." Ryan responded with a grunt, his tone dismissive. "Could be a fake. People like her always have tricks." Linda's stomach churned. People like her. What did that even mean? Was it because she was black, a woman, both? She had faced prejudice before, of course. Subtle comments or sideways glances, but never anything this blatant. This wasn't just suspicion, it felt personal, like they weren't just questioning her credentials, but her very existence. She tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on finding a way out of this mess. But every time she replayed the events in her mind, she came up empty. Her documents were valid. Her clearance was real. There was no reason for her to be treated like a criminal. Unless someone wanted her detained on purpose. That idea sent a shiver down her spine. Could someone be targeting her? It seemed far-fetched, but the strange messages she'd received in the weeks leading up to her trip suddenly felt more ominous. They had been vague, cryptic warnings telling her to cancel her plans, but now they seemed like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't understood until now. Someone didn't want her to reach Houston, but who and why? Just then, the door creaked open, and Karen stepped back inside. Her expression was apologetic, though there was a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. "Captain Hayes," she said softly, "I know this is difficult for you, but we're still waiting on confirmation from higher authorities. In the meantime, I need to ask you a few more questions." Linda nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. "Of course," she said. "Ask whatever you need." Karen pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through notes. "Can you tell me again about your recent travel history? Any trips outside the country?" Linda frowned. "Not recently. My last international trip was 6 months ago for a conference in Geneva. Everything went smoothly then." "And what about your current assignment?" Karen asked. "You mentioned you're heading to Houston for a classified mission. Can you elaborate on that?" "I'm sorry," Linda replied, her voice firm but polite. "I can't discuss the details of my mission. It's confidential." Karen hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. One last thing. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Strange emails, phone calls, anything like that?" Linda's heart skipped a beat. So they had seen the messages too. Or maybe they suspected something. She chose her words carefully. "I've received some odd texts recently, yes. Anonymous ones. They warned me not to go to Houston. At the time I thought they were pranks, but now—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Karen's eyebrows shot up. "You think someone might be trying to stop you from reaching your destination?" "It's possible," Linda admitted, "but I don't know who or why. All I know is that this—" she gestured around the room— "feels like more than a simple clerical error." Karen studied her for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she stood up and tucked her tablet under her arm. "Thank you for answering my questions, Captain Hayes. I'll pass this information along to the team handling your case." As soon as Karen left the room, Linda let out a long breath. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her mind raced with possibilities. If someone was deliberately sabotaging her, they must have access to sensitive systems that stored personnel records and clearance data. That meant it wasn't just a random hacker messing around. This was someone with insider knowledge. Someone dangerous. The thought chilled her to the bone. Who would do such a thing? And how far were they willing to go to keep her grounded? Would they frame her for something? Accuse her of being a fraud? The mere idea of it made her furious. After all, she had sacrificed for her career, for her country. This was how she was being repaid? Time continued to drag on. Linda alternated between pacing the room and sitting in silence, staring at the wall. Her flight to Houston was scheduled to depart in less than an hour. Even if they cleared her soon, there was no way she'd make it to the gate in time. The briefing she was supposed to attend would start without her, and her absence would raise questions. Questions she didn't have answers to yet. Finally, the door opened again, and this time both Greg and Ryan entered. Their expressions were grim, their body language tense. Greg held a clipboard while Ryan crossed his arms over his chest. Neither of them looked happy to be there. "Captain Hayes," Greg began, his voice clipped. "We've reviewed your case thoroughly, and we still haven't been able to verify your credentials. Until we receive confirmation from your superiors, we can't release you." Linda stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? You've had hours to sort this out. How much longer are you going to keep me here?" Ryan stepped forward, his tone sharp. "We're following protocol, ma'am. If you cooperate, this will go a lot smoother." "Cooperate?" Linda repeated, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I've done nothing wrong. I've answered every question, provided every document you've asked for. What more do you want from me?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Look, we're just doing our job. If your story checks out, you'll be free to go. But until then what? Linda interrupted, her frustration boiling over. You expect me to sit here indefinitely while my career hangs in the balance, while whoever's behind this gets away with ruining my reputation? Ryan's face darkened. We don't appreciate accusations, ma'am. We're trying to protect national security. If you're hiding something— I'm not hiding anything, Linda snapped, slamming her hand on the table. The sound echoed loudly in the small room. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen appeared in the doorway, looking alarmed. Is everything okay in here? She asked cautiously. Greg and Ryan exchanged glances, then stepped back. We're fine, Greg muttered. He turned to Linda, his voice cold. We'll update you when we have more information. As they left the room, Linda slumped back into her chair, feeling drained. She hated feeling powerless, but that's exactly what this situation was doing to her. She was used to taking charge, solving problems, making decisions. Here, she was stuck waiting for others to act, and it was driving her mad. Karen lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching her. I'm sorry about all this, Captain Hayes, she said quietly. I wish there was more I could do. Linda managed a weak smile. It's not your fault. Thank you for trying. Once Karen closed the door, Linda let her head fall into her hands. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She needed to focus, to think clearly. There had to be a way out of this. Her eyes drifted to the camera in the corner once again. Its red light blinked steadily, a silent witness to her ordeal. An idea began to form in her mind. If someone was watching, maybe she could send a message, not with words but with actions. She glanced at the metal table, then at the wall beside the camera. With a deep breath, she stood up and moved closer to the wall. Using the heel of her boot, she tapped out a rhythmic pattern against the wall. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause. It was a distress code she had learned during her training, a signal designed to alert allies to trouble. She didn't know if anyone would see it or understand it, but it was worth a try. Anything was better than sitting here and doing nothing. When she finished, she returned to her seat, her heart pounding. Had it worked? Would anyone come to her aid? Only time would tell. For now, all she could do was wait, and hope that help was on the way. Linda sat in the small room, her mind racing as she replayed what had just happened. She had tapped out the distress code against the wall, hoping someone, anyone, would notice. It was a long shot, but it was the only thing she could think of to draw attention to her situation. Now all she could do was wait and hope that her message would reach someone who could help. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. The room was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Linda's eyes kept darting to the camera in the corner. Was anyone watching? Had they seen her signal? Or was she just wasting her time? Her thoughts were interrupted when the door creaked open again. This time it wasn't Greg or Ryan, it was Karen. She looked flustered, her usual calm demeanor replaced by something closer to panic. Without saying a word, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Captain Hayes, Karen began, her voice low and urgent. I need to talk to you. Linda straightened up, her heart skipping a beat. What is it? Karen glanced at the camera, then back at Linda. Not here, she whispered, motioning toward the far corner of the room. We need to keep this quiet. Confused but intrigued, Linda stood up and joined Karen in the corner. Up close, she could see beads of sweat forming on Karen's forehead. Whatever was going on, it was serious. I overheard something, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg and Ryan, they're not just following protocol. Someone higher up ordered them to detain you. They won't say who, but it sounds like there's pressure coming from outside the airport. Linda's stomach dropped. So it was deliberate. Someone had orchestrated this whole mess. But who? And why? Do you know anything else? Linda asked, keeping her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Karen shook her head. Not much. Just that your file has been flagged in multiple systems. It's not just the airport, it's everywhere. Whoever did this wanted to make sure you couldn't go anywhere. Linda clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This isn't about me breaking rules. This is about stopping me from doing my job. Karen nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. And I don't think they're going to let you go anytime soon. Linda took a deep breath, trying to stay focused. Then we need to figure out how to get word to my people. My team will come looking for me if I don't show up. That's the problem, Karen said, lowering her voice even further. They've already confiscated your phone, and they're monitoring communications in and out of this room. If you try to call anyone, they'll know. Linda frowned. So what are you suggesting? Karen hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. There might be another way. There's an old maintenance tunnel under the airport. It leads to the parking lot. If you can get there, you might be able to escape before they realize what's happening. Escape? The idea was risky, but staying put wasn't an option either. Every second she wasted gave whoever was behind this more time to dig their claws deeper into her life. She had to take the chance. How do I get to this tunnel? Linda asked. Karen pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and unfolded it. On it was a rough sketch of the airport layout with a route marked in red. Follow this path, Karen explained. It'll take you through a service hallway near the baggage claim area. From there, you'll find a door labeled Maintenance. Access, that's where the tunnel starts. Linda studied the map carefully, committing it to memory. And once I'm in the tunnel? It's a straight shot to the parking lot, Karen replied. But be careful. There are cameras along the way. Stick to the shadows and move quickly. Linda nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest. Thank you, Karen, I won't forget this. Karen forced a weak smile. Just promise me you'll get to the bottom of this. No one deserves to be treated like this. Not you. Not anyone. With that, Karen slipped out of the room, leaving Linda alone once again. Her heart was pounding, but she knew she didn't have time to waste. Grabbing her carry-on bag, she checked the corridor outside the door. It was empty. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hallway and began following the route Karen had shown her. The service hallway was dimly lit, the walls lined with pipes and wires. The air smelled musty, and the sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor. Linda moved quickly, her eyes scanning for cameras. Whenever she spotted one, she ducked into the shadows, holding her breath until she was past it. Finally, she reached the door labeled Maintenance Access. It was locked, but Karen had anticipated that. Tucked into the map she had given Linda was a small keycard. Sliding it into the slot, Linda heard a soft click. The door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. She descended, cautiously, her hand brushing against the cold metal railing. At the bottom, she found herself in a damp, low-ceilinged tunnel. The air was cooler here, tinged with the smell of earth and mildew. A faint light glowed in the distance, guiding her toward the exit. As she walked, Linda's mind raced. Who could be behind this? Was it someone within her own organization? Or was it an external threat, targeting her because of her role in the upcoming mission? Either way, they had gone to great lengths to stop her, and that meant whatever she was involved in was bigger than she had realized. After what felt like an eternity, she finally reached the end of the tunnel. Pushing open a heavy metal door, she emerged into the parking lot. The cool night air hit her face, and for the first time in hours, she felt a glimmer of hope. But her relief was short-lived. As she scanned the rows of cars, she spotted movement in the distance. Two figures were walking toward her, their faces obscured by the shadows. One of them raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. Linda froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Were they more security agents, or worse, had her pursuers already tracked her down? Captain Hayes, a familiar voice called out. It was Marcus Cole, one of her closest colleagues. Beside him stood Rachel Dawson, her commanding officer. Both wore expressions of concern mixed with relief. Marcus? Commander Dawson? Linda stammered, hardly daring to believe her eyes. What are you doing here? We came as soon as we heard, Marcus said, stepping forward. Your distress signal got through. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Linda blinked, stunned. Her gamble had worked. Someone had seen her coded message and acted on it. For the first time since arriving at the airport, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Commander Dawson placed a firm hand on Linda's shoulder. We'll explain everything later. Right now, we need to get you out of here. This place isn't safe. Nodding, Linda followed them to a waiting car parked nearby. As they drove away from the airport, she finally allowed herself to relax, sinking into the seat. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. Not anymore. For now, though, she was safe. And that was enough. The car sped away from the airport, its tires humming softly against the wet pavement. Linda sat in the back seat, her mind racing as she tried to process everything that had happened. The weight of the day's events pressed down on her, but there was no time to rest. She needed answers. Now. Commander Rachel Dawson sat in the passenger seat, her sharp eyes scanning the road ahead. Marcus Cole, driving, kept glancing at Linda through the rearview mirror, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, the silence broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Finally, Rachel turned around to face Linda. We don't have much time, she said, her voice firm but calm. Tell us what happened. Start from the beginning. Linda took a deep breath, steadying herself. She recounted the events at the airport, the suspicious questions, the flagged credentials, the hostile attitude of Greg and Ryan. As she spoke, she could see Marcus's knuckles tighten on the steering wheel, while Rachel's jaw clenched with barely contained anger. When Linda finished, Rachel let out a slow, heavy sigh. This wasn't random, she said. Someone went to great lengths to sabotage you. Your files being flagged across multiple systems, that's not something an amateur could pull off. Marcus nodded in agreement. Whoever did this has access to high-level databases. They knew exactly how to make it look like you were the problem. Linda frowned. But why me? What am I involved in that's worth all this effort? Rachel hesitated, then exchanged a glance with Marcus. It's about the mission, she said finally. The one you're supposed to lead in Houston. What about it? Linda asked, leaning forward. I thought it was classified. Only a handful of people even know the details. It's bigger than we realized, Marcus chimed in. We've been investigating some strange activity lately. Cyber attacks targeting government systems, leaks of sensitive information. At first we thought it was just hackers looking for money or attention, but now we think it's something else, Rachel finished. A coordinated effort to disrupt our operations. And whoever's behind it knows you're key too. This mission. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. You mean they're trying to stop the mission altogether? Exactly, Rachel replied. And they're willing to do whatever it takes, including taking you out of the picture. The car fell silent again as Linda absorbed this revelation. She had always known her work was important, but she never imagined it would make her a target. The thought made her angry, not just at her attackers, but at herself for not seeing it sooner. So what do we do now? She asked after a moment. If they've compromised my credentials, they might already be moving on other fronts. Rachel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small device, a secure communication tablet. We're ahead of them, she said. As soon as your distress signal came through, we launched an investigation. We've isolated the breach and are working to track its source. In the meantime, we need to keep you safe. Safe where? Linda asked. If they can get to me at the airport, they can get to me anywhere. That's why we're taking you to a secure location, Marcus explained. Somewhere off the grid. Until we figure out who's behind this, you'll stay hidden. Linda didn't argue. She trusted Rachel and Marcus implicitly, and she knew they wouldn't take risks with her safety. Still, the idea of going into hiding rankled her. She hated feeling powerless, especially when so much was at stake. The car turned onto a narrow, winding road lined with tall trees. The headlights illuminated patches of fog drifting across the pavement, giving the scene an eerie quality. After a few miles, they arrived at a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods. Its windows were dark, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. "This is it," Marcus said, cutting the engine. "Home sweet home for now." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but functional. A table and chairs occupied the center of the main room, surrounded by shelves stocked with supplies. A laptop sat on the table, connected to a satellite dish mounted outside. It was clear this place had been prepared in advance, ready for situations like this. Rachel handed Linda a folder containing documents and photos. "While you were detained, we gathered intel on potential suspects," she explained. "Take a look, see if anything stands out." Linda flipped through the pages, studying the faces and names. Most of them were unfamiliar: contractors, engineers, analysts, but one caught her eye. Paul Meyer, a former employee of a defense contractor that worked closely with Space Command. According to the file, he had been fired months ago for leaking confidential data. "Do we know where Meyer is now?" Linda asked, holding up the photo. Rachel nodded. "He disappeared shortly after his termination. No forwarding address, no bank activity. We suspect he's operating under the radar. And he has the skills to hack into government systems," Marcus added. "If anyone could flag your credentials and create chaos, it's him." Linda stared at the photo, her mind racing. Could Meyer really be behind this? If so, what was his endgame? Was he working alone, or was there someone else pulling the strings? Before she could ask more questions, the laptop on the table beeped. Marcus hurried over and opened it, revealing a live feed of encrypted communications. "We've tapped into their network," he said. "They're discussing next steps." Linda joined him at the table, peering at the screen. The messages were fragmented, written in code, but one phrase stood out. "Phase 2 initiated." Whatever it meant, it couldn't be good. "They're moving faster than we expected," Rachel muttered, pacing back and forth. "We need to act quickly." Linda stood up, resolve hardening in her chest. "Then let's act. Tell me what I need to do." Rachel stopped pacing and looked at her, pride flickering in her eyes. "First, we identify their base of operations, then we shut them down before they can cause any more damage." "We'll split up," Marcus suggested. "One team tracks Meyer, another handles the cyber side. We'll coordinate remotely." Linda nodded. "Count me in. I'm not sitting on the sidelines while they destroy everything we've worked for." Rachel smiled grimly. "That's what I like to hear. But remember, this isn't just about revenge. It's about protecting humanity's future. If they succeed, it won't just be us who pays the price." For the first time since her ordeal began, Linda felt a spark of hope. Yes, the odds were stacked against them. Yes, the stakes were impossibly high. But she wasn't alone. Together, she and her team would find a way to turn the tide. As the hours passed, the trio worked tirelessly, piecing together clues and formulating a plan. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows. Inside, the air buzzed with tension and purpose. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. But they weren't giving up. Not yet. Not ever. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. Rain pounded against the windows of the cabin, and flashes of lightning lit up the dark sky. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Linda, Rachel, and Marcus worked side by side, their movements deliberate as they sifted through data, analyzed maps, and pieced together fragments of information. Every second counted. Linda leaned over the table, her eyes glued to a grainy surveillance photo of Paul Meyer. The man's face was sharp, his expression cold and calculating. Something about him unsettled her, not just his actions, but the possibility that he might have allies within the system. If he had help from someone inside Space Command, it would explain how they managed to compromise her credentials so thoroughly. "Do we know who he's working with?" Linda asked, breaking the silence. Rachel shook her head. "Not yet, but based on the encrypted messages we intercepted, it's clear he's not acting alone. There's at least one other person pulling strings." Marcus tapped a key on the laptop, bringing up a map dotted with red markers. "These are locations where we've detected unusual activity. unauthorized access attempts, strange energy spikes, that kind of thing. We think one of these spots is their base of operations. Linda studied the map closely. Most of the markers were clustered near major cities, but one stood out, a remote facility in the desert, far from prying eyes. "What's this place?" she asked, pointing to the marker. "It's an old research lab," Marcus explained. "Abandoned years ago after budget cuts. Officially, it's supposed to be empty. Unofficially, well, let's just say it's the perfect hideout for someone like Meyer." Rachel crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the map. "If they're planning something big, and given what we've seen so far, I'd bet they are. That's where they'll do it." Linda nodded slowly. "Then that's where we need to go." Rachel turned to her, frowning. "It won't be easy. They'll have security measures in place, cameras, guards, maybe even traps. And if Meyer's there, he'll recognize you the moment he sees you." "I'm aware of the risks," Linda said firmly. "But sitting here isn't going to stop them. We can't afford to wait." Rachel hesitated, then sighed. "You're right. But we'll need a plan and backup." Over the next hour, the three of them devised a strategy. Marcus would stay behind to monitor communications and coordinate with Space Command, while Rachel and Linda headed to the desert facility. Their goal was simple: infiltrate the lab, gather evidence, and neutralize the threat. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best chance they had. By dawn, the rain had eased into a light drizzle. Linda and Rachel loaded gear into a nondescript SUV parked outside the cabin. Weapons, radios, flashlights, and hacking tools filled the trunk. They dressed in dark clothing, blending utility with stealth. As they climbed into the vehicle, neither spoke much. The weight of the mission hung heavy between them. The drive to the desert took hours, the landscape growing increasingly barren as they left civilization behind. Rolling hills gave way to flat, cracked earth, and the horizon stretched endlessly, in all directions. By the time they reached the outskirts of the facility, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. They parked several miles away and approached on foot, moving cautiously under the cover of twilight. The lab loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the fading light. Broken windows and rusted metal panels suggested years of neglect, but faint lights glowing inside told a different story. Rachel raised a hand, signaling for Linda to stop. "Wait here," she whispered. "I'll scout ahead." Linda crouched, though watching as Rachel disappeared into the darkness. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Rachel returned, her face grim. "There are guards patrolling the perimeter," she said, "and cameras covering most angles. We'll need to disable them before we get close." Linda nodded. "How?" Rachel pulled out a small device from her pack, a portable jammer. "This should knock out the cameras temporarily, but it won't last long, so we'll have to move fast." Together, they crept closer to the building, staying low to avoid detection. When they were within range, Rachel activated the jammer. A soft hum filled the air, and the nearest camera flickered off. Seizing the opportunity, they sprinted toward the entrance, slipping through a gap in the fence. Inside, the lab was eerily quiet. Dust-covered equipment lined the walls, and the air smelled stale. Faint voices echoed down a hallway, guiding them. Deeper into the complex, they moved carefully, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. Eventually, they found themselves outside a large room. Through a cracked door, they could see monitors displaying streams of data, along with schematics of satellites and orbital paths. In the center of the room stood Paul Meyer, his back to them as he typed furiously on a laptop. Beside him was another figure, a tall man wearing a hooded jacket. His identity was obscured, but his posture radiated authority. "This is it," Rachel whispered. "We need to take them down." Linda tightened her grip on her weapon, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Let's do it." They burst into the room, weapons drawn. "Hands up!" Rachel barked, her voice cutting through the silence. Meyer spun around, his eyes widening in shock. "You!" he spat, glaring at Linda. "How did you find us?" "That doesn't matter," Linda replied coolly. "What matters is why you're doing this." The hooded man stepped forward. raising his hands slowly. "Calm down, everyone," he said, his tone smooth and measured. "There's no need for violence." "Shut up," Rachel snapped. "Who are you?" The man lowered his hood, revealing a face Linda recognized instantly. Commander Harold Grayson, a high-ranking official in Space Command. Her stomach churned as realization hit her. This wasn't just some rogue operation. It went straight to the top. "Commander Grayson," Linda said, her voice trembling with anger. "Why are you involved in this?" Grayson smirked, unfazed by the accusation. "Because progress comes at a cost, Captain Hayes. Humanity isn't ready for the truth. Not yet." "What truth?" Linda demanded. Grayson gestured to the monitors. "Out there beyond our planet lies a universe teeming with life. Advanced civilizations, technologies far beyond our comprehension. If humanity learns about them too soon, chaos will ensue. Wars will break out. Our species will destroy itself." "So you decided to play God?" Rachel interjected, disgust evident in her voice. "Deciding what humanity can and cannot handle? It's for the greater good," Grayson insisted. "Once we're prepared, once we've developed the means to protect ourselves, then we'll reveal everything. Until then, secrecy is essential." Linda shook her head, her fists clenched. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to manipulate people, sabotage careers, and endanger lives, all in the name of your twisted vision." Grayson's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Then I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree." Without warning, he lunged for a nearby control panel, pressing a button. Alarms blared, piercing the air. Red lights flashed throughout the facility, and heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. Reinforcements were coming. "We need to leave. Now!" Rachel shouted, grabbing Linda's arm. But Linda hesitated, her eyes locked on Grayson. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steely. "Whatever you're planning, we'll stop it." Grayson chuckled darkly. "I'd like to see you try." With that, Linda and Rachel turned and ran, retracing their steps through the labyrinthine corridors. Behind them, shouts grew louder as guards closed in. Bullets whizzed past, ricocheting off walls, but they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. Finally, they reached the exit, bursting into the cool night air. The SUV was still waiting where they'd left it, its engine idling. Marcus greeted them anxiously, relief washing over his face when he saw they were unharmed. "Did you get what we needed?" he asked as they climbed in. Linda nodded, clutching a stolen hard drive containing the lab's data. "We got more than that." "We know. Who's behind this now?" As the SUV sped away, leaving the lab and Grayson behind, Linda felt a surge of resolve. They had uncovered the conspiracy, but the fight was far from over. For the sake of humanity's future, they couldn't afford to lose. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and silent. Somewhere out there, among the stars, lay answers to questions humanity wasn't ready to ask. But Linda Hayes was determined to ensure that when the time came, her species would face those answers standing tall, together. The SUV raced across the desert, its tires kicking up clouds of dust as it sped toward safety. Inside, Linda sat clutching the hard drive they had taken from the lab. Her mind raced with everything they had uncovered: Grayson's betrayal, Myers' involvement, and the chilling revelation about extraterrestrial life. It was too much to process all at once, but one thing was clear: humanity wasn't ready for this truth. And yet, Grayson's methods were wrong. Secrets like these couldn't be kept forever, especially when people were willing to sacrifice others to protect them. "We need to get this data to headquarters," Linda said, her voice firm despite the chaos swirling inside her. "If we can prove what Grayson's been doing, we'll have enough leverage to stop him." Marcus nodded from the driver's seat. "Agreed, but we'll have to be careful. If he finds out we've got evidence, he'll come after us full force." Rachel, seated beside Marcus, glanced back at Linda. "And we can't trust anyone else in command, not until we know how deep this goes. For all we know, Grayson might not be acting alone." Linda frowned. The thought of corruption reaching higher levels of Space Command made her stomach churn. She had dedicated her life to serving her country, believing in its values and mission. To discover that someone like Grayson, a man she had respected, was capable of such deceit shook her deeply. But she refused to let it break her. Instead, it fueled her determination to set things right. By the time they reached a secure location, a remote safe house miles away from the desert, the sun had risen, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Exhausted but focused, the trio gathered around a table to examine the stolen hard drive. Marcus connected it to a laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he decrypted the files. "This is going to take some time," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They've got heavy encryption on these documents." "Do your best," Rachel said. "We don't have much of it." As Marcus worked, Linda paced the room, her thoughts consumed by what came next. Exposing Grayson wouldn't be easy. He was powerful, influential, and ruthless. Taking him down would require more than just evidence. It would demand strategy, timing, and allies they could truly trust. Finally, Marcus let out a triumphant grunt. "Got it," he said, leaning back in his chair. On the screen, rows of classified files appeared detailing Grayson's plans. There were schematics of advanced AI satellites designed to detect alien activity, transcripts of encrypted messages between Grayson and Meyer, and even recordings of meetings where Grayson justified his actions to unseen accomplices. Linda scanned the documents, her heart pounding as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Grayson wasn't just hiding the existence of extraterrestrial life. He was actively preparing for contact. The satellites weren't meant solely for detection. They were armed with experimental weapons capable of neutralizing potential threats from space. In his twisted logic, Grayson believed humanity needed protection before it could face the unknown. "This changes everything," Linda whispered, her voice tinged with awe and dread. "He's not just hoarding secrets, he's planning for war." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "War? Against who? Aliens?" "Maybe," Linda replied. "Or maybe against anyone who disagrees with his vision. Either way, this isn't about defense, it's about control." Marcus closed the laptop, his expression grim. "So what's the plan? We can't exactly walk into command and accuse Grayson without proof." "We'll need to build a case," Rachel said. "Something undeniable, something that exposes him publicly." Linda nodded. "And we'll need allies. People within the organization who still believe in transparency and integrity. Not everyone's corrupt." Over the next few hours, they devised a strategy. Using the data from the hard drive, they compiled a dossier detailing Grayson's crimes, tampering with personnel records, orchestrating cyber attacks, and collaborating with Meyer. They also reached out to trusted colleagues, discreetly sharing enough information to rally support without tipping off Grayson. Their efforts paid off. By the end of the day, a small group of senior officers had agreed to help. Together, they scheduled an emergency meeting under the guise of discussing routine operations. Unbeknownst to Grayson, the real agenda was his arrest. The meeting took place in a high-security briefing room at Space Command headquarters. Linda stood at the head of the table, flanked by Rachel and Marcus. Around them sat the officers they had recruited, their faces serious and resolute. At the far end of the table, Commander Harold Grayson sat calmly, seemingly unaware of what was about to unfold. "Thank you all for coming," Linda began, her voice steady and commanding. "What I'm about to share is classified information. It concerns a threat not only to our organization but to humanity itself." She pressed a button on a remote, and images from the hard drive appeared on a large screen behind her. One by one, she laid out the evidence. Grayson's tampered files, his collaboration with Meyer, and his plans for militarizing space exploration. Gasps rippled through the room as the officers absorbed the truth. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Rachel stepped forward, addressing the group. "Commander Grayson has betrayed the principles we stand for. His actions jeopardize everything we've worked to achieve. We cannot allow this to continue." Grayson rose to his feet, his face pale but composed. "This is absurd," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're accusing me based on fabricated evidence? Ridiculous." "It's not fabrication," Linda shot back. "It's proof. Proof that you've manipulated systems, silenced dissent, and endangered lives, all in the name of your so-called greater good." For a moment, Grayson looked as though he might argue further, but then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Very well," he said, his tone resigned. "If this is how it ends, so be it. But mark my words, you're making a grave mistake. Humanity isn't ready for the truth." With that, security. Agents entered the room and escorted Grayson away. The weight of the moment settled over everyone present, a mix of relief and unease. They had won, for now, but the implications of what they had uncovered lingered. In the days that followed, the fallout from Grayson's arrest reverberated throughout Space Command. Investigations were launched, reforms implemented, and safeguards put in place to prevent similar abuses of power. Linda became a symbol of resilience and integrity, her courage inspiring others to speak out against injustice. At a press conference held weeks later, Linda addressed the public, her uniform gleaming under the bright lights. "What happened was unacceptable," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "But it taught us an important lesson, that trust is earned, not given. As we move forward, we must remain vigilant, transparent, and united in our pursuit of progress." Her words resonated across the nation, earning her renewed respect and admiration. Though the shadow of Grayson's betrayal loomed large, it also served as a reminder of why their work mattered. Humanity's future depended on cooperation, not division. As the cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Linda gazed skyward. Beyond the stars lay mysteries waiting to be unraveled, challenges yet to be faced. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain: humanity would rise to meet it, together.